Hi everyone, I'm Ashy. Today is my third painting in the monochromatic watercolor series I'm working on to bring some calm to my kids' chaotic playroom. So I start by wetting up the whole page with clean water and then just dropping in some color. So I do have this pre-mixed in my palette because I've done others in this same color, but I don't have this as a convenience color. So I mixed sap green, cobalt blue, and Payne's gray to get this color, but then I use that same color for the whole painting. I start with light washes first, focusing on the top and bottom of the pages to leave some white in the middle that's going to be like basically just like white sky. And I did dry the layers between each because I just really wanted to build up the color slowly. I also tilt the page to make the paint slowly work its way just naturally down the page, and that just creates a nice soft transition between the dark at the top and the light in the middle. It's kind of like an ombre effect. So that's a nice way to create that soft edge. I also sometimes kind of dry the painting a little bit in between layers just to achieve like a damp stage faster. So I don't dry it all the way, but I want to get to that damp stage so that these splatters work a little bit better. And then I splatter the clean water into that damp paint to create those intentional cauliflowers or like blooms, just to create some interest and texture into the sky. When I am happy with the sky, I start to work on the forest scene along the bottom. So I just start by wetting the bottom half of the page and I wash in color and make loose tree shapes kind of toward the top of my wash to get my farthest back layer of trees. So this first layer is nice and light to kind of force that perspective and make this look farther in the distance. It's also looser and less in focus for those tree shapes. They're not distinct at all. They're really washy and loose, and that pushes them back into the distance. It's just using atmospheric perspective to create that illusion. With each layer, I mix just a little bit thicker mix of paint, so just a little bit less water, and that darkens the value slightly. And for each tree shape, I also for each tree layer, I start to make the tree shapes a little bit more distinct as well. So the bottom half stays wet on wet the whole time and stays real loose and like washy, but the top, each layer gets more distinct for the tree shapes. And again, I just use the heat tool to dry each layer before moving on to the next one to make sure that it doesn't just become one big blob of green. And the heat tool here really just significantly decreases the time to paint this. I could have let it dry naturally between each layer, but I'm super not patient, and so I actually wouldn't be able to do that, even though I said that I could. But with the heat tool, this painting only took about 50 minutes total, and that was from start to finish, just in one sitting. Whereas if I would have had to let the layers dry naturally, it would have taken way longer. So again, I just continue to build up those layers, and I splatter clean water also into the damp paint toward the bottom of the page. I've done that on several layers, but in the final layer is where you're actually going to see that the most. But I do that just to kind of mimic the same texture that is in the sky. And that creates a nice sense of balance between kind of the top left of the painting and the bottom right. And it gives it a nice composition. And I just keep going basically until I'm happy with the level of contrast between the first and last layer of trees so that it looks like a dense, misty forest. When I'm happy with that, I move on to really the moment of truth. I'm adding a dragon to the sky, a really big dragon. I didn't start with drawing or sketching this out at all. I'm just kind of winging it. Ha, pun. I did start with a really light value And so I did know that I could like wash this back out and blend it with the sky if I completely screwed it up. So even though I'm completely winging it, I was strategic about how I was winging it. So, you know, if you want to try that, just start with a light wash, something that you could almost erase with extra water, right? So I just paint in a loose curve for the tail, like into the body. And then I add my first wing, which is going to be like the front wing, to one side and meet the body where the base of the neck will be. So I haven't painted in the neck or the head yet, but I'm meeting that spot with this wing, and that's going to guide me to the shape of my head. And then I sweep around a curved neck and then paint in the head. So I try to just keep this shape really, I don't know, simple, I guess, for the head here. It's basically just like a pointed oval. And I do try to keep a highlight where the eye is going to go. So you see me lifting that out a little bit, but it's a pretty simple, like curved shape there. I do add just a little bit of darkness kind of to the back, and I get the impression of his like front leg there. And then I go ahead and add in, like build out the second wing shape. And so I kind of sketch it out going off the edge of the page here and just basically fill that in. Once I decide that I'm pretty happy with the basic shape of the dragon, I start to build up the darks and really define some of the features further. So I'm just kind of adding some dark along the back, but also adding like little spiky things off his neck and head and his jaw as well. I'm also adding a lot of darkness to certain parts. So I'm going mostly off instinct for these darks, but I really wanted the face to be the focal point and be the most distinct. So it needed to have the highest contrast between the background, which is nearly white, and then his head, which is like a really, really dark green, almost black, right? So that contrast makes it a focal point. I also build up the color on the wings, especially the wing that is, you know, supposed to be in front. So I want that to be another kind of focal point, and I want it to be really like imposing, like this dragon is huge and imposing. So I do make that wing pretty dark as well. The back wing is going to be a little bit more faded out, again, because it's a little bit more in the distance, right? So it's maybe more in the clouds or more in the mistiness, but it's also just farther back in the atmosphere. So it's more faded out and less detailed. So I basically just add in a wash of color that's not as dark as the front wing. And I build up some more darkness just around the top of the neck to create kind of an ombre from the top of his neck down to the bottom of his neck where it's lighter. I add just a little bit of color to the body of the dragon, but again, I'm keeping it fairly light compared to the face and the front wing. So it's not the focus here. It's kind of, I don't want to say an afterthought, that's not really right, but it's definitely not the focus. I do add just a little bit of darkness along the top of the tail, again, just to create that transition from a little bit darker to a little bit lighter. And then I add in a back leg, just super light wash, just to give the impression of that leg showing up. The curve in the front of the body is his front leg, so you can see both legs there. The back one is lighter. And then again, I'm just building up that darkness on his head and blending it down his neck a little bit more as I go. And finally, I just add a little bit of line work to the front wing and just a little bit of dry brushing texture just to add a little bit extra. Really, that's all. And this was not as hard as I thought it was going to be, and I'm super happy with how it turned out. I really hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for watching. Check out my last video for like a beautiful complementary painting to this one. Have an awesome day.